R.M. Ballantyne, originally published in 1892. Chapter 1. On the Hunt. On a brilliant summer morning in the last quarter of the 17th century, a small troop of horsemen crossed the ford of the River Cairn in Dunfordshire, not far from the spot where stands the little church of Irongray, and gaining the road on the western bank of the stream, wended their way towards the moors and uplands, which lie in the neighbourhood of Scotch Hill. The dragoons, for such they were, trotted rapidly along the road that led into the solitudes of the hills, with all the careless dash of men whose interests are centred chiefly on the excitements of the passing hour, yet with the unflagging perseverance of those who have a fixed purpose in view. Their somewhat worn aspect, and the mud with which they were bespattered, from jack-boot to iron headpiece, telling of a long ride over a rugged road. The officer in command of the party rode a little in advance. Close behind him followed two troopers, one of whom was a burly, middle-aged man with a stern, swarthy countenance, the other a youth whose tall frame was scarcely, if at all, less powerful than that of his comrade in arms, though much more elegant in form, while his youthful and ruddy yet masculine countenance suggested that he must at that time have been but a novice in the art of war. This youth alone, of all the party, had a somewhat careworn and sad expression on his brow. It could have hardly been the result of fatigue, for there was more of ease and vigor in his carriage than in that of any of his companions. "We should be near the river by this time, Glenning," said the leader of the party, reining in and addressing the swarthy trooper. "Aye, sir, the Clooden Rin's just ain't the turn o' the road there," replied the man. "You'll hear the roar o' the fire in a minute or two." Even as he spoke, the dull growl of a cataract was heard, and a few minutes later the party came upon the ford of the river. It was situated not many yards below the picturesque waterfall, which is now spanned by the Reuton Bridge, but which at that time was unbridged. At all events, if a bridge had previously existed, it had fallen or been carried away, and the wild gorge was impassable. The sound of the fall alone told of its vicinity, for a dense mass of foliage hid it completely from the trooper's view until he had surmounted the steep bank on the other side of the stream. "Are you well acquainted with this man Black?" asked the leader of the party as they emerged from the thick belt of trees and shrubs by which the Clooden was shaded, and continued their journey on the more open ground beyond. "I ken him well, sir," answered the trooper. "Andrew Black was an old friend of mine, and a big stout angry man he is, kindly disposed, no doubt, when ye let him alane, but perfect devil incarnate when he's roused. He did me an ill turn aince that I've no paid him off for yet." "I suppose, then," said the officer, "that your guiding us so willingly to his cottage is in part payment of this unsettled debt?" "Maybe it is," growled the trooper grimly. "They say," continued the other, "that there is some mystery about the man, that somehow nobody can catch him. Like an eel he has slipped through our fellows' fingers and disappeared more than once, when they thought they had him quite safe. It is said that on one occasion he managed even to give the slip to Claverhouse himself, which you know is not easy." "That may be, sir, but he'll no slip through my fingers gin I ain't get a grip on his throttle," said the swarthy man with a revengeful look. "We must get a grip on him somehow," returned the officer, "for it is said that he is a sly helper of the rebels, though it is difficult to convict as to catch him, and as this gathering, of which our spies have brought information, is to be in the neighbourhood of his house, he is sure to be mixed up with it." "No doubt about that, sir, and so we may manage to kill two birds with one stone, but I'm in difficulty no, sir, for ye ken I'm no acquainted with this country nae farrer than the Clooden Ford, and here we are come to a fork in the road." The party halted as he spoke, while the perplexed guide stroked his rather long nose and looked seriously at the two roads, or bridle paths, into which their roads had resolved itself, and each of which led in two very divergent paths of the heath-clad hills. This guide, Glenning, had become acquainted with Black at a time when the latter resided in Lanarkshire, and, as he had just said, was unacquainted with the region through which they now travelled beyond the river Clewden. After a short conference, the officer in command decided to divide the party and explore both paths. "You will take one man, Glenning, and proceed along the path to the right," he said. "I will try the left. If you discover anything like a house or cot within a mile or two, you will at once send your comrade back to let me know, while you take up your quarters in the cottage and await my coming. Choose whom you will for your companion." "I choose Will Wallace, then," said Glenning, with a nod to the young trooper whom we have already introduced. The youth did not seem at all flattered by the selection, but of course obeyed orders with military promptitude, and followed his comrade for some time in silence, though with a clouded brow. "It seems to me," said the swarthy trooper, as they drew rein and proceeded up a steep ascent at a walk, "that you're no so pleased as ye might be with the work on hand." "Pleased!" exclaimed the youth, whose tone and speech seemed to indicate him an Englishman. "How can I be pleased when all I have been called on to do since I enlisted has been to aid and abet in robbery, cruelty, and murder? I honor loyalty and detest rebellion as much as any man in the troop, but if I had known what I know now, I would never have joined you." Glenning gazed at his companion in amazement. Having been absent on detached service when Will Wallace had joined about 3 weeks previously, he was ignorant both as to his character and his recent experiences. He had chosen him on the present occasion simply on account of his youth and magnificent physique. "I doubt I have made a mistake in choosing you," said Glenning with some asperity after a few moments, "but it's o'er late now to rectify it. What ails ye, lad? What have ye seen?" "I have seen what I did not believe possible," answered the other man with suppressed feeling. "I have seen a little boy tortured with the thumb-screws, pricked with bayonets, and otherwise inhumanly treated, because he would not, or could not, tell where his father was. I have seen a man hung up to a beam by his thumbs, because he would not give up money which perhaps he did not possess. I have seen a woman tortured by having lighted matches up between her fingers, because she would not, or could not, tell where a conventicle was being held. I did not, indeed, see the last deed actually done, else I would have cut down the coward who did it. The poor thing had fainted, and the torture was over when I came upon them. Only 2 days ago I was ordered out with a party who pillaged the house of a farmer because he refused to take an oath of allegiance, which seems to have been purposely so worded as to make those who take it virtually bond-slaves to the king, and which makes him master of the lives, properties, and consciences of his subjects, and all this done in the king's name and by the king's troops." "And what part did you take in these doings?" asked Glenning with some curiosity. "I did my best to restrain my comrades, and when they were burning the hayricks, throwing the meal on the dunghill, and wrecking the property of the farmer, I cut the cords with which they had bound the poor fellow to his chair, and let him go free." "Did anybody see you do that?" "I believe not, though I should not have cared if they had. I am thoroughly disgusted with the service. I know little or nothing of the principles of these rebels, these fanatics, as you call them, but tyranny or injustice I cannot stand, whether practiced by a king or a beggar, and I am resolved to have nothing more to do with such fiendish work." "Young man," said the swarthy comrade in a voice of considerable solemnity, "ye hae obviously mistaken your calling. If you were new to the parts, you would ken that the things you object are quite common. Punishing and harrying the rebels and fanatics, Covenanters they call themselves, has been going on for years o'er the land. In my opinion, it's weel deserved, and nothing they can do or say will prevent it. though what you do and say is not unlikely to cut short your own career by means of a rope round your throttle. But losh, man, I wonder ye hain't heard about these matters afore now. My having spent the last few years of my life in an out-of-the-way part of Ireland may account for that, said Wallace. My father's recent death obliged my mother to give up her farm and return to her native town of Lanark, which she now lives with a brother. Poverty and the urgency of a cousin have induced me, unfortunately, to take service with the dragoons. After what you've said, am I to count on your helping me or no? Asked Glenning. As long as I wear the king's uniform, you may count on me obeying orders unless I am commanded to break the plainest laws of God, answered the young man. As our present business is only to discover the cottage of Andrew Black, there seems likely to be no difficulty between us just now. I'm no sure of that, but if you'll take my advice, lad, you'll hold your tongue about them matters. If Clavers heard the half of what you've said to me, he'd send you into the next world without giving ye time to say your prayers. Freedom of speech is no permitted at the present time in Scotland, unless it be the right kind of speech, and—" He stopped, for at that moment 2 young girls suddenly appeared at a bend of the road in front of them. They gazed for a moment at the soldiers in evident surprise, and then turned as if to fly, but Glenning put spurs to his horse and was beside them in a moment. Leaping to the ground, he seized the girls roughly by their arms as they clung together in alarm. One of the 2 was a dark-eyed little child. The other was fair, unusually pretty, and apparently about 15 or 16 years of age. The trooper proceeded to question them sharply. "Be gentle," said Will Wallace sternly as he rode up, and also dismounting stood beside them. "No fear of them running away now." The swarthy trooper pretended not to hear, but nevertheless relaxed his grip and merely rested his hand upon the fair girl's shoulder as he said to the other, "Now, my wee doll, you cannot be far from him. I'se be sworn. What's your name?" "Aggie Wilson," answered the child at once. "And yours?" "Oh, and yours?" "Jean Black," replied the blonde timidly. "Oh-ho, and your father's name is Andrew, and his house is close by, I'll be bound, so you'll be guide enough to show us the way tilt. But first, my bonny lass, you'll give me a—" Slipping his arm around the waist of the terrified blonde, the intruder rudely attempted to terminate his sentence in a practical manner. But before his lips could touch her face, he received a blow from his comrade that sent him staggering against a neighboring tree. Blazed with astonishment and wrath, Glenning drew his sword and sprang at his companion, who, already full of indignation of the memory of what he had been so recently compelled to witness, could ill brook the indignity thus offered to the defenseless girl. His weapon flashed from its sheath on the instant, and for a few moments the 2 men cut and thrust at each other with savage ferocity. Wallace, however, was too young and unused to mortal strife to contemplate with indifference the possibility of shedding blood of a comrade. Quickly recovering himself, he stood entirely on the defensive, which his vigorous activity enabled him easily to do. Burning under the insult he had received, Glenning felt no such compunctions. He pushed his adversary fiercely, and made a lunge at last, which not only passed the sword through the left sleeve of the youth's coat, but slightly wounded his arm. Roused to uncontrollable anger by this, Will Wallace fetched his opponent a blow so powerful that it beat down his guard, rang like a hammer on his iron headpiece, and fairly hurled the man into the ditch at the roadside. Somewhat alarmed at this sudden result, the youth hastily pulled him out and kneeled beside him, anxiously examining his head. Much to his relief, he found that there was no wound at all, and that the man was only stunned. After the examination, Wallace observed that the girls had taken advantage of the fray to make their escape. Indignation and anger having by that time evaporated, and his judgment having become cool, Wallace began gradually to appreciate his true position, and to feel exceedingly uncomfortable. He had recklessly expressed opinions and confessed to actions which would of themselves ensure his being disgraced and cast into prison, if not worse. He had almost killed one of his own comrades, and had helped two girls to escape who could probably have assisted them in the accomplishment of the duty on which they had been dispatched. His case, he suddenly perceived, was hopeless, and he felt that he was a lost man. Will Wallace was quick of thought and prompt in action. Carefully disposing the limbs of his fallen comrade, and resting his head comfortably on a grassy bank, he cast a hurried glance around him. On his left hand and behind him lay the rich belt of woodland that marked the courses of the rivers Clewden and Cairn. In front stretched the moors and hills of the ancient district of Galloway, at that time given over to the tender mercies of Graham of Claverhouse. Beside him stood the two patient troop horses, gazing quietly at the prostrate man, as if in mild surprise at his unusual stillness. Beyond this he could not see that with the physical eye, but with the mental orb he saw a dark vista of ruined character, blighted hopes, and dismal prospects. The vision sufficed to fix his decision. Quietly, like a warrior's wraith, he sheathed his sword and betook himself to the covert of peat morass and the heather hill. He was not the first good man, and true, he had sought the same shelter. At the time of which we write, Scotland had for many years been in woeful plight, with tyranny draining her lifeblood. Cupidity grasped her wealth, hypocrisy and bigotry misconstruing her motives and falsifying her character. Charles II filled the throne. Unprincipled men alike in church and state made use of their position and power to gain their own ends and enslave the people. The king, determined to root out presbytery from Scotland as less subservient to his despotic aims, had forcibly to impose prelacy on her as a stepping stone to popery, had no difficulty in finding ecclesiastical and courtly bravos to carry out his designs, and for a long series of dismal years persecution stalked red-handed through the land. Happily for the well-being of future generations, our covenanting forefathers stood their ground with Christian heroism, for both civil and religious liberty were involved in the struggle. Their so-called fanaticism consisted in a refusal to give up the worship of God after the manner dictated by conscience and practiced by their forefathers, in declining to attend the ministry of the ignorant and too often vicious curates forced upon them, and in refusing to take the oath of allegiance just referred to by Will Wallace. Conventicles, as they were called, or the gathering together of Christians in houses and barns, or on the hillside to worship God, were illegally pronounced illegal by the king and council, and disobedience to their tyrannous law was punished with imprisonment, torture, confiscation of property, and death. To enforce these penalties, the greater part of Scotland, especially the south and west, was overrun by troops, and treated as if it were a conquered country. The people, holding that in some matters it is incumbent to obey God rather than man, and that they were bound not to forsake the assembling of themselves together, resolved to set the intolerable law at defiance, and went armed to the hill meetings. They took up arms at first, however, chiefly, if not solely, to protect themselves from licentious soldiery, who went about devastating the land, not scrupling to rob and insult helpless women and children, and to shed innocent blood. Our Scottish forefathers, believing in common with the lower animals and lower savages that it was a duty to defend their females and little ones, naturally availed themselves of the best means of doing so. About this time a meeting, or conventicle, of considerable importance was appointed to be held among the secluded hills in the neighborhood of Irongray, and Andrew Black, the farmer who's chosen to select the particular spot to make the preliminary arrangements. Now this man, Black, is not easily described, for he was a curiously compound character. To a heart saturated with the milk of human kindness was united a will more inflexible, if possible, than that of a Mexican mule, a frame of Herculean mold, and a spirit in which profound gravity and reverence waged incessant warfare with a keen appreciation of the ludicrous. Peacefully inclined in disposition, with a tendency to believe well of all men, and somewhat free and easy in the formation of his opinions, he was very unwilling to resist authority, but the love of truth and justice was stronger within him than the love of peace. In company with a shepherd, Quentin Dick, a man of nearly his own size and build, Andrew Black proceeded to a secluded hollow in Scotch Hill to gather and place in order the masses of rock which were to form the seats of the communicants at the contemplated religious gathering, which seats remain to this day in the position they occupied at that time, and are familiarly known in the district as the communion stones of iron gray. This concludes Chapter 1 of Hunted and Harried by R.M. Ballantyne. Join me next time for Chapter 2. Thank you.